Welcome to Ancient Echoes. The Second World War, one of the most cataclysmic conflicts in human history, forever altered the course of the 20th century. It was a war fought on an unimaginable scale, involving dozens of countries, stretching across continents and reshaping the global landscape. Yet, its origins were deeply embedded in the unresolved issues from the First World War. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, was meant to bring peace, but instead sowed the seeds of future conflict. The punitive terms imposed on Germany created economic turmoil, political instability, and a sense of humiliation that would be exploited by Adolf Hitler and his Nazi regime. Hitler's rise to power in the early 1930s marked the beginning of a new era of aggressive nationalism and expansionism. His regime sought to overturn the post-war order and pursued an ideology rooted in Aryan supremacy, racial hatred, and imperial conquest. By 1938, the Nazis annexed Austria, defying the peace established by the Versailles Treaty, and no one intervened. But it was the invasion of Poland on September 1st, 1939, that triggered the outbreak of war. Germany's blitzkrieg tactics, lightning-fast strikes using combined air and ground forces, overwhelmed Poland within weeks. In response, Britain and France declared war, but the speed and intensity of Germany's military might had already put the world on edge. The war quickly spread beyond Europe. As Germany expanded its reach across the continent, the skies of Britain darkened under the barrage of Nazi bombers. The Battle of Britain in 1940 was a defining moment in the early stages of the conflict. The Royal Air Force, against overwhelming odds, held firm, preventing a German invasion and marking the first significant defeat of Hitler's forces. Meanwhile, in the east, Hitler's forces turned their attention to the Soviet Union in June 1941. Operation Barbarossa, the largest military invasion in history, aimed to crush the Soviet Union and expand Nazi territory across Eastern Europe. The war on the Eastern Front became the deadliest, with unimaginable brutality, as millions of soldiers and civilians perished in the fighting. Yet, despite initial successes, Hitler's forces were halted by the fierce Soviet resistance, especially during the brutal siege of Stalingrad, which became a turning point in the war. While Europe burned, the Pacific theater was also engulfed in conflict. Japan, driven by imperial ambition and a desire to control Asia, had already been engaged in military aggression since the 1930s. But it was the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, that forced the United States into the war. The attack decimated the American Pacific Fleet and, in one devastating blow, reshaped the future of warfare. The United States, until then focused on isolationism, mobilized its economy and military for a global war. The Pacific saw brutal campaigns such as the Battle of Midway and the island-hopping strategy employed by American forces, which gradually pushed Japan back. Yet, the war's brutality would not stop there. As the Allies fought to liberate Europe, the Axis powers dug in their heels, most notably in the defense of Normandy, where the Allies launched a monumental amphibious assault on June 6, 1944, known as D-Day. This operation, which saw tens of thousands of troops storm the beaches of France, marked the beginning of the liberation of Western Europe from Nazi rule. The successful invasion set in motion a series of defeats for the Axis powers, culminating in the fall of Berlin in May 1945 and the eventual unconditional surrender of Germany. However, the war did not end with Europe's surrender. The conflict continued in the Pacific, where Japan refused to capitulate. The United States, in a bid to end the war swiftly and decisively, dropped atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945, causing unparalleled devastation. The bombs killed an estimated 200,000 people, either immediately or from subsequent radiation sickness, and forced Japan's hand in surrendering on September 2nd, 1945. With Japan's defeat, the Second World War came to an official end, but the cost of this victory was staggering. An estimated 70 to 85 million people lost their lives. Cities lay in ruins, and the global balance of power was irrevocably changed. In the wake of the war, Europe was left shattered, and the once dominant Axis powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan, were defeated and divided. The world's superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, emerged from the ashes, but they now stood at odds with one another, initiating the Cold War. The United Nations was established in an effort to prevent another global conflict and to promote peace, though the legacy of the war's devastation loomed large. The Second World War had been more than a military confrontation. It was a turning point in human history, a moment when the world saw both the peak of human suffering and the strength of human resilience. It left a legacy of suffering, but also hope, urging humanity to reflect on the consequences of unchecked aggression and the fragility of peace. The war not only redefined borders, but also reshaped ideologies, economies, and the very concept of international cooperation, setting the stage for a new world order in the post-war era.